Wait, he wants to what? Force him to be prime minister. How do you force someone to be prime minister? Lock him up. Yeah. Man. Yeah, it's getting weird down there, huh? Yeah. Okay. December 9th, 1944. They keep sinking your ships. They keep flying planes into your ships and wrecking them and killing your guys. You don't want to alarm people at home, but also you don't want them to know how successful they are, since the pilots can't exactly send reports home. What do? News blackout. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Red Army advanced in Hungary, but Adolf Hitler determined to hold Budapest to the last. The Battle of Hürtgen Forest ended in the west, and the Allies advanced to the Roer River, and kamikaze pilots flying out of Luzon were causing serious problems for the Allies in the Philippines. In Europe, the Germans are actually planning a big offensive of their own in the west. British intelligence, which picks up most everything the Germans do, has still failed to predict it. They've been getting loads of decrypts the past weeks of unusual German preparations, troops moving across the Rhine and concentrating on the west side of it, air power grouping, but they buy into the German deception that this is all to meet the current Allied offensive. Most also believe the Germans are no longer capable of a large-scale counterattack. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill is not convinced of that, though. He is suspicious. That German offensive is scheduled to go off at the end of next week. The Allied offensive continues, of course, this week. On the 3rd, attacks to reach the Brandenburg-Bergstein Ridge begin again, and with aerial support for once, they take Brandenburg. The Germans counterattack at Bergstein the 6th, but neither side can realistically hold it this day. Committing the Rangers on the 7th turns the tide in the American favor, though, and the Germans fall back. And once the Allies climb up Castle Hill, well, anyone who stood atop Castle Hill and looked south could have predicted with a fair amount of certainty the direction of the next effort by troops of the 5th Corps. For from Castle Hill one can see Schmidt, and beyond Schmidt, the waters of the Roer River backed up behind the Roer River dams. After a day or so of skirmishing, the 8th Division would be overlooking the west bank of the Ruhr. Much farther to the north, troops of the 9th Army earlier had closed to the river, and 1st Army's 7th Corps could not be denied much longer. Unless those dams could be breached from the air, somebody would have to take them in a ground attack. That somebody obviously would be the 5th Corps. It's true that 9th Army to the north has by today cleared the west bank of the Roer River in its zone. After 23 days of trying, though, they have not reached the Rhine, the original objective, only the Ruhr, which is just 15 to 20 kilometers from their departure point. The German defenses have been pushed back, but they have not been cracked nor broken. Also, as that quote said, 3 of the 4 Corps, 1st and 9th Armies, are at the west banks of the Roer River. Its 7th Corps, ironically enough the drive that was supposed to have been the main effort, that has not reached the river. They're some 5 kilometers short of it, but Joe Collins has called a halt to rearrange his men. He plans to begin his attacks once more tomorrow. But what about those dams? While American troops were approaching the Roer River in late November and early December, concern was mounting in command circles about the obstacle that remained before sizable forces might cross the river with reasonable safety. The obstacle was the neglected objective, the dams on the upper reaches of the Ruhr, which the Germans might employ to produce floodwaters to isolate any force that had crossed the Ruhr. By late November, the Allies were making recon flights over them almost every day and monitoring any changes in water level. The ground offensive has been slow, and the dams were not quickly overrun, and there are those who think an air attack could breach them and end any threat of controlled flooding. 1st Army Commander Courtney Hodges is a big proponent of this and asked Army Group Commander Omar Bradley to okay it back on November 22nd. That's passed on to the RAF. And last week on the 30th, they said, sure, they'll give it a shot. Over the next few days, weather prevents this, but the 4th, 200 planes fly over the target. Only 25 actually bomb it because of poor visibility, and damage is negligible. Yesterday, the 8th, comes a big bombing run. 205 planes dropped 797 tons of bombs on 3 of the dams. A few actual hits are registered, but neither of the 2 dams hit is broken. Hodges remains firm. He wants 1,000 bombers a day, every day. The next run will not be until the 11th, though, because of weather. Hodges, though, also has a plan to take them from the ground. This is for Leonard Giroux's 5th Corps. Orders are issued the 7th, and the attack is to go off the 13th. 2 weeks ago, I talked a bunch about the U.S. 3rd, U.S. 7th, and French 1st Army attacks on the southern end of the Western Front. Well, Patton's 3rd Army is still fighting and slogging around the Roer River bridgeheads, but as for U.S. 7th and French 1st Armies, which make up Jake Devers' 6th Army Group, well, we saw that Devers wanted to make a crossing of the Rhine at Rastatt, but Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower nixed this. A few words more about that whole situation. Alexander Patch's 7th Army was ordered to head north, and Jean de Latre's 1st French Army was to clear Alsace of the enemy below Strasbourg. Philippe Leclerc's 2nd Armored Division was to head south and go under de Latre's command. High Command began thinking about a joint attack by 7th and 3rd Armies, U.S. 7th and U.S. 3rd Armies. Many people, including obviously Devers, believed that Eisenhower made a big error by not allowing the attack across the Rhine. Yet Devers made errors of his own. Not least, he failed to recognize how feeble the French were. 6 of 8 German infantry divisions in the 19th Army had been destroyed, leaving a 50,000-man remnant in a rectangular Alsatian pocket that extended for 45 miles along the Rhine and 25 miles west towards the High Vosges. Rundstedt estimated that the pocket, which was centered on the town of Colmar, could only hold out for 3 weeks. The French are exhausted, though. They have a bunch of new recruits without much training, and they have terrible logistics. An 8-division army should have something on the order of 100,000 support troops, but de Lattre has maybe a quarter of that. But probably worst of all is the fighting amongst the Frenchmen. Leclerc, for example, flat out says no to joining de Latre's command. He believes de Lattre to be a traitor for serving with the Vichy French army. What I'm saying is the French haven't made much headway with the Colmar pocket, and it doesn't seem like they will anytime soon. But there is Allied progress being made this week in Italy. The new 8th Army offensive begins the 3rd. Canadian 1st Division takes Russie this day and then advances to the northwest towards Lamone. They reach the river, but fail to make a bridgehead and take heavy casualties. Now, the German 114th Jaeger Division, who I mentioned holding their positions, though other units were withdrawing to the Lamone 2 weeks ago, now begin their withdrawal, which means Canadian 5th Division can push forward and turn towards Ravenna, which they liberate the 4th. The Lamone floods the 6th because of heavy rains, but despite that, British 46th Division has crossed it by the 7th, as has Polish 3rd Division, who take Monte Rinaldo southwest of Faenza. German commander Heinrich von Vietinghoff commits some reserves to 4th, with the plan being to withdraw to the Genghis Khan line. But Hitler nixes this the 7th, so the Germans will stand and fight. Today, the 9th, they hit 46th Division west of Faenza, causing heavy casualties, but not eliminating the bridgehead. The Soviets are still on the move this week in Hungary. On the 3rd, units from Rodion Malinovsky's 2nd Ukrainian Front take Miskolc. It was weakened a few days earlier by the withdrawal of a German division to fight between Lake Balaton and the Danube. Malinovsky launches his armies again at Budapest from the 5th, but this time to hit it from multiple sides. The idea is for 7th Guards Army to attack from northwest of Hatvan. 6th Guards Tank Army and a mobile group will follow to the northeast of the city. Fyodor Tolbukin's 3rd Ukrainian Front is helping this out by his own renewed push, taking Vukovar and Szigetvar the 5th and reaching Székesfehérvár, 60 or so kilometers southwest of Budapest on the 7th. Tolbukin's forces have been able to do this by recently adding substantial force to the Batina and Apatin bridgeheads further down the Danube, which allows them to finally make this drive. Thing is, it's a 2-pronged drive, right? And the reason for this is to confuse the Germans as to the Soviet intentions. maybe Tolbuchen's main objective is to drive into Austria between Lake Balaton and the Drava. We saw last week that German command was split on divining Tolbuchen's intentions. His left flank actually reaches the Drava late in the week, making a bridgehead at Barch. Well, back to Malinovsky. His offensive goes off, and 7th Guards hit at the junction between German 6th and 8th armies. For the rest of the week, and even the beginning of next week, they slowly grind their way around Budapest to the north, cutting the city's communications with the industrial area, or with Slovakia even. Today, 2nd Ukrainian forces reached the Danube north of Budapest at Vach. This is an important point to take. Meanwhile, 46th Army from Midnight the 4th has been forcing the Danube south of the city. By today the 9th, they clear Erchi and link up with elements of Tolbuchen's 3rd. Budapest is now largely cut off from the rest of Hungary. OKH wants Army Group South Commander Johannes Friesner to counterattack, and they decide to send him 2 panzer divisions and 3 60-tank Tiger battalions to do it with. But should they do it in the north or the south? Friesner thinks the situation is more serious to the southwest of Budapest between the lakes. Heinz Guderian thinks the north. Hitler decides to roll with Friesner, but in part because he doesn't want to lose the bauxite mines between the lakes. Friesner then waits for 2 things: the tanks to arrive and a change in the weather. It's been above freezing, and it's also been raining a lot. So the plains southwest of Budapest have been turned to mud traps. Some parts are even underwater. While this also impedes Soviet armor, if the Soviets get moving before the German reinforcements arrive, they may well succeed with just infantry alone, since Army Group Fretter Pico's 30-kilometer front between Velence Lake and the Budapest bridgehead is manned by 1 Volksgrenadier Division, 800 police, and some Hungarian hussars, which is fewer than 3,000 men total. We'll see what happens soon enough. There is stuff going on in Hungary behind the lines in the Soviet-occupied territory. See, Joseph Stalin has been quite hurriedly setting up a new Hungarian government. Already at the end of October, exiled Hungarian communists began returning, now with elements of the NKVD. They set up the Szeged Center, since obviously they can't use Budapest, and connected with the Hungarian resistance. Here's the thing. The Soviets are, of course, helping the Hungarian Communist Party build itself up, but because policy at the moment calls for the creation of a popular front, which by nature requires other parties, they're also helping organize the Social Democrat Party, the National Peasant Party, and the Small Farmers Party. These 4 parties together form the Hungarian National Liberation Front. This is formally proclaimed this week on the 3rd in Szeged, demanding the elimination of all fascist and anti-national organizations, the purging from the state apparatus of such elements, the institution of political rights and freedom, a comprehensive program of land reform, state control of the banks, the nationalization of the petroleum industry, coal and bauxite mines, and the guarantee of an 8-hour working day. Every town and every village is to set up a national committee, which will be the organ of the front, and they're going to have a national assembly to draft a constitution and set up a provisional government. On the 5th, a big meeting in Debrecen also adopts this program. So, that's the Hungarian National Liberation Front. But there's major stuff going on this week for the Greek National Liberation Front, EAM. At the end of last week, EAM called for a demonstration in Athens for the 3rd and a general strike the 4th. Now, rolling back a few days, in late November, relations between EAM and the nationalists in the government deteriorated, and on the 1st, ELAS forces in Attica attacked and disarmed National Guard units. ELAS is EAM's military branch. The demonstration is to show how popular EAM is, and that no Greek government can really be representative without them. And since the order went out the 2nd to disarm all partisans, they think they can put pressure on the government concerning that as well, of course. At least 100,000 and as many as 500,000 people turn up at the demonstration, heading to Syntagma Square. Now, most of these people are unarmed, but EAM and KKE, the Communist Party, have armed members there as security forces. Well, some 60,000 people managed to enter the square, when the police begin shooting. The demonstration disperses, but in 15 minutes, 11 civilians are killed and 60 injured. Angelos Evert, chief of Athens police, will say this years later. When the first threatening wave of protesters arrived in front of the offices of the police directorate, the situation reached a dangerous and critical point. There could be no guarantee of the peaceful disposition of the demonstrators. After all, I had clear evidence that the Communist Party was now determined to push the situation to the point of armed conflict. If the tolerant attitude of the law enforcement continued, there would be an immediate danger of capturing the critical points of the capital. This was the plan of the Communist Party. Was there any doubt that the state would be abolished for good if these points were occupied? At that exact moment, I also responsibly ordered the violent dispersal of the attacked demonstrators who, as demonstrated by the murder of the police sergeant, were by no means unarmed. Okay, a police sergeant is in fact killed during the demonstration, but a bunch more cops are after the shootings began because an enraged crowd manages to catch and literally dismember several of them. There are many competing accounts of all of this. Nikos Pharmakis, future member of Greek parliament, is in the palace, and he says they are ordered to fire at will when the crowd reaches the tomb of the unknown soldier. British officer Wilfred Byford Jones, below police headquarters, says he heard the command, and the police hesitantly then opened fire on the crowd. Beyond the effects on the local population, this does serious damage to Anglo-Greek relations. I'll explain. There are British officers present, though they are not part of the actual shootings. But the international press writes that it associates the British with what is seen as local fascism. And indeed, this is a major diplomatic disaster for Britain and for Winston Churchill. See, Greek Prime Minister Georgios Papandreou resigns the night of the 4th, which prompts Churchill to cable to British ambassador to Greece, Reggie Leeper, force Papandreou to stand on his duty. Should he resign, he should be locked up till he comes to his senses. EM begins attacks against collaborationist Organization X that night, and Churchill cables, "Do not hesitate to act as if you were in a conquered city where a local rebellion is in progress. It would be a great thing for you to succeed in this without bloodshed if possible, but also with bloodshed if necessary." This prompts Seymour Cox, a Labour MP, to say in the House of Commons the 8th, "Is the Prime Minister claiming the right to appoint Prime Ministers of Allied States as he might appoint a few parliamentary private secretaries, or as Hitler appoints Gauleiters in the different countries which come under his sway?" But the situation is bad. Martial law is declared the 4th. On the 5th, British tanks are used and British ships shell EM positions, subsequent to Churchill's telegram. By the 6th, it is full-blown battle in Athens as Elam launches a bunch of attacks, and the rest of the week, the fight is on. I'm going to go back and cover some of this fighting in more depth next week when I have a bit more time, but it looks like a civil war may have begun. We shall see. The situation there has deteriorated for all involved, but the situation in China has deteriorated for the Japanese despite their successes. I'm going to peer into the future now and see that tomorrow on the 10th, a column of Japanese troops sent up from Indochina into western Guangxi province link up with Japanese units near Longzhou. Japan's Ishigo offensive has, after over half a year, succeeded in establishing an overland corridor into Southeast Asia. However, while that's going on, the position now began to deteriorate for Japan, with virtually no new military supplies arriving after November. Meanwhile, Chinese reinforcements arrived from Sichuan and the northwestern provinces. Chinese nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek has also sent General Tang Enbo down to Guiyang with his 13th Army and some other smaller units. And the Americans recently found a cache of arms in Guizhou province. For real, 50 brand new field guns and 50,000 shells and a bunch of smaller weapons just stored in warehouses and apparently forgotten by the central government. So the reinforced Chinese begin now taking back positions in Guizhou and Guangxi from the Japanese, beginning with Dushan this week on the 8th. It is the Americans who are taking Japanese positions on Leyte this week. The grinding fight for Breakneck Ridge and control of the mountain barrier swings fully in the American favor this week. On the 7th, it is finally secure, but man, the Japanese have slowed 32nd Division for most of a month. But when elements of the 32nd enter the Ormoc corridor, then it's reached an actual tipping point. The Americans have, along the front from Karagar Bay to Ormoc, 7 divisions and 2 regiments. Heinrichs and Galicio point out in Implacable Foes that this is the largest American battle force so far assembled in the Pacific. That includes 77th Division, who finally arrived the 7th with an amphibious landing on the eastern shore of Ormoc Bay. I mentioned this last week. This landing meets little resistance. Over the rest of the week, they push forward to the edge of Ormoc town and will hit it tomorrow. And engineer battalions have been arriving too, working on completing and extending Tacloban, Dulag, and Tanawan airfields. By next week, they will be able to service 317 fighters, who will work in concert with the 8 bomber squadrons operating out of Angauer. Douglas MacArthur, in overall command from Tacloban, and Walter Kruger at 6th Army, both complain, though, that the pace is too slow, particularly that of 32nd Division, even though 32nd played a vital role in the fight for Breakneck Ridge, which doesn't really seem fair. MacArthur's misguided criticisms of the performance of his troops revealed his own poor understanding of the conditions in which they were operating. But these peevish remarks about his troops also suggested the tension and frustration he felt during late October and November in the face of multiple delays and postponements. His army was stuck, his air force sunk in mud, and his navy hounded by kamikazes. After the parade across New Guinea and the naval triumph of Leyte, it was a shock to be stymied by the land battle on Leyte. The fast carriers were pressing to get away for recuperation and missions elsewhere, leaving MacArthur's navy with only the planes from the remaining 6 Taffy escort carriers, and his air force slimmed down to 1 active group of fighters on 1 airfield. Well, at least that last is a lot better by next week, as I said. But hey, as 77th Division is landing, a kamikaze force turns up. 3 fighters scramble from Tacloban to intercept. 9 of the Japanese planes drop down and make for destroyer man. 4 are shot down. 1 passes by, 1 misses and hits the water, and 3 slam into the destroyer. Game over. The crew abandons ship and it's sunk with gunfire. The other 3 kamikazes target destroyer Ward. 2 hit the water, 1 hits the ship, driving right into the boiler room. There's a huge explosion, it loses all power, and it too is abandoned. After 77th has disembarked, more kamikazes hit the return trip, just 4 fighters. 2 are shot down, 1 hits the water, and the 4th hits destroyer Little in the bridge. This knocks out communications and damages the ship badly enough that she'll have to go back to the States for repairs. Destroyer Larson is hit by a single kamikaze, also causing enough damage to send the ship home to the States. MacArthur and Nimitz order a total news blackout, partly to prevent any sort of panic at home, and partly to prevent the Japanese from learning the scale of damage that they're doing. And with that, I will end this week of the war. A week of Japanese kamikazes, a Japanese corridor through China, serious turmoil developing in Greece, and Allied advances in Hungary, Italy, and northwest Germany. Also, on the 4th, Bomber Harris restarts the firebombing of German cities with the Heilbronn firestorm, killing 7,147 German civilians. That is covered more in depth in our War Against Humanity series. And on the 7th, a new government in Romania is formed under Romanian Army Chief of Staff Nicolae Radescu. Back to Greece for a minute. Pretty heavy stuff Winston Churchill is cabling down to Greece. Force Papandreou to remain as Prime Minister. Act as if you were in a conquered city. Deal with this with bloodshed if necessary. Let's remember that Greece is not a British colony, nor is Athens a conquered city. We did, though, see just the other month, Stalin and Churchill agree to their nation's spheres of influence in southeastern Europe. And we've seen what that meant for Stalin in Romania and Bulgaria. So I guess Winston is just following suit. I guess that's modern war. Or something. If you want to see some earlier turmoil in the region, here's a Between Two Wars episode about the Greco-Turkish War we did a few years ago, in just a minute. All of this is possible thanks to the Time Ghost Army. You can join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the newest commissioned army officers, and Joel Gruter or Greuter is the army member of the week. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.